Great, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We are here for MetaTraversal 4. My name is Evo Heyning. I will be your host and guide from all of us across the Metaverse and XR communities. Thank you for joining us for a conversation about alignments and agreements. I want to thank you for being a part of this journey with us. Now, obviously, as we are talking about something that is so nascent and is still in this formation stage, we're talking about not just the metaverse today, but how the metaverse connects, specifically how we move between spaces, worlds, experiences, and especially the collaboration that happens between independent groups, between companies, between associations and organizations all over the world. So we thank you for helping to create what is a collaborative framework. The metaverse is our collective. It is the shared space that we are building together. Now, this is a participatory concept, and this is a participatory event. So in our last 3 MetaTraversal events, we have seen tremendous presentations from all sorts of R&D leaders, platform holders, folks who are working on standards, but also people who are working on the portals and ways that we move between worlds. Today, we're going to bring more of that conversation together in 2 panels and a fantastic keynote from Tony Parisi. And specifically, we'd like to look at how we come together, how we decide to make agreements to work together, how we align around standards and the extensions of standards. And specifically, we would love to open the doors to collaboration, to participation. So in our previous MetaTraversal events, we've discussed, for example, IEEE and the spatial web with Gabe and the immersive web. And now we're going to today look with Chronos and the GLTF extensions to see how we can begin to share not just our art, but programmable, collective, and creative assets and experiences that we are building together. So I want to welcome a number of you who are coming up to share. We also welcome your comments. That can happen through AWE Live, but especially as well on YouTube. So we are going to encourage your comments and questions today. Please feel free to participate in any way that makes sense for you. Now, obviously, we are human beings first. The first 3 MetaTraversal events, we have tried to center this work in our humanness and in making sure that we see each other for our amazingness, for our diversity, for our different ideas, and how they can potentially dance together in what is a common space. How we choose to share is a big part of these agreements. That includes our data sharing, but that also includes infrastructure. That includes how we come to the table to collaborate. So we're going to look at a number of key use cases today, not just the R&D, which is absolutely fantastic, but the productions and the projects that have also been coming from this research and development. We have a number of panels today, including Amy Peck, who will be joining us with Rika, Maria, Niko, and Cynthia, amazing leaders, each in their own right, also representing amazing companies doing work in this space. We're going to hear from the XR women and specifically their use cases for interoperability on events, for being able to move together effectively, and for building collaboration. And we're going to hear from a technical panel, including Neil Trevett at Chronos Group, Robert Long, and Trevor Flowers, as well as Sophia, Moshasha. And I'm going to welcome Julie Smithson at this point to join us, as well as
Hi,
our
Evo.
next stage of sense making. Hi, Julie. It's great to see you. So Julie has been a fantastic partner and collaborator in the sense making process and in helping us figure out how do we see each other effectively, how do we put our ideas together, and then how do we begin to make that move from ideation into collaboration or production or active experimentation. So Julie, I would love it if you could share just a little bit of the sense-making work you've been doing. And I know that we're going to bring up a different graphic here because we have we have some screen sharing as well that I wanted to be able to try and share for folks. So if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and we'll go ahead and bring that in. Yes.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So yeah, we've been on a little bit of a journey in the past couple of months, where we came from, and some great conversations about, what is everybody thinking about? What is everybody, when it comes to interoperability? What are the things that we need to think about when we're in a virtual space? And a couple months ago, when we first started MetaTraversal 1 and 2, and 3, we came up and identified some of the important pieces that were important to the conversations, things that everybody kept saying and talking about. And I think being in the space myself, I can identify with all of the things that will be touch points as our identities start to interact within these different worlds. So we identified a couple of different categories that we're going to start to really kind of drive into. What are the conversations around interoperability? And then we can grow into the standards. There obviously needs to be some further definitions made on all of these things, and that's really a starting point. So the marketplace, let's start with avatars. As we start to move into these spaces, we have our identities. We're creating avatars that either look like us or similar to us, and we start to own that, and that becomes part of who we are. So we need conversations about avatars and how they transform. And I'll show you in a couple of minutes an example of something that took place a couple of weeks ago that will show the transformation of one avatar from one world into another platform. The marketplace is certainly another huge conversation that we need to have as people start to purchase and buy things in these virtual spaces, whether it be a digital good or a real good, or it's NFTs. The conversation of NFTs has only just begun. It's strong right now, and we need to keep those conversations going. And as we start to traverse between these worlds, what you buy in one world, will it pass through into that other world? And there were great conversations in the last sessions about, possibly having a backpack that you carry your digital good items that could traverse between worlds. That's a huge piece of how the experience economy is going to take shape and form. Portals, UX, UI design, that's a huge conversation too on, what is the definition of a portal? I don't think we have actually clarified that. And sometimes portals just go between the platform itself. But now we're talking about portals that may go from one platform all the way into another platform. So the definitions here are really going to be, crucial for our industry to define. And that's why we're here today. The ethical piece, certainly the first part about the avatar system and the mental agency around owning your avatar and who you are, taking that humanity first approach. I like to use the term humanics quite a bit, because there's 3 components to that term. And the first is being human first, being able to have conversations with other people and staying true to who you are. And then the other 2 components of humanics is understanding that technology that is taking place within your identity in this space, and also how that technology is being used. So humanics are certainly important when it comes to understanding the ethics and having that mental agency. And then, conversations around that, come to privacy and security around, who can see where you are in these worlds at certain times. For example, do my friends always know where I am? Or can people look up and see which world I'm in? Those types of conversations need to be had. And then, of course, there's the engineering side of things, and these are discussions that I'm going to save for my more technical friends, and how we get deeper into the layers of frameworks and working with the Kronos Group and W3C to make sure that we're all on the same page. And my role here today, I hope I can contribute back again by listening to all of the presentations that we have coming up, and talking about how do you enter into these virtual worlds? How do you enter in and become part of communities, and you start to make transactions and really remain interoperable in between all of these different worlds. And hopefully today we'll have some more information being presented by all of these different and great speakers that can really start to drive into some of these focuses. So I'm really excited to be here, and thank you so much, Evo, for allowing me to create a little bit of some sense making to where we've come from and where we are today.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I brought in Karen as well, because as I understand it, you are going to share a little bit along with Sophia, who I'm going to bring in now. Hi, Sophia.
Yeah, sure.
You're going to share a bit of a case study of how you implemented this with the XR Women Group, correct?
Yes, thank you, Evo. Thank you so much. And thanks, Karen and Sophia, for joining me, introducing everybody, my co-chairs of XR Women. The XR Women has been established for just over a year now, and we are a group of very smart individuals who meet every week in the iLearn campus and have come together to build a community of support and education and learning. And one of the things that our group was a part of, and our community was a part of, specifically Karen and Sophia, a couple of weeks ago at the Poly Awards, we actually demonstrated and performed a live event, and maybe we'll insert here. I know Ben Irwin is standing by to actually show us this video, but this is the reason why we are here today, is to share with you this activity.
And Karen here in the Poly's World in VR Land live. We're here for a very special part of the show. What is so special about WebXR is the ability to be truly interoperable, and we're going to demonstrate traveling from this WebXR world to our XR Woman Museum in frame. All right, Karen, you ready to go?
I think so, Sophia.
We'll meet you in there.
Okay.
Let's go.
I love your twinning shirts, ladies. There she goes.
Okay.
That was a fun ride.
Hey, Caitlin.
Yeah.
There you go.
Fancy seeing you here. Hey, Karen. Hey, Julie.
Hi there. We made it. We made it to the other side.
We made it to the other side.
Amazing. So maybe, Sophia, do you want to kind of break down what just happened in that scene and why that scene is so important to the conversations that we're having today and what that really means?
Yeah, so we had started, this was during the Poly's WebXR Awards that happened a couple of weeks ago. And this was one of the intermissions, like halftime shows that we did. We did a lot of live check-ins from various watch parties, and this happened to be one of them. And we started in VR Land in our Poly's watch party there. As you know, the avatars that were included for that space, for that platform. And then we put a portal in to go to Frame by Verbella, where we had actually created a XR Woman Museum in Frame, and that exists now. And we'll hopefully pass the link on. It's just / XR Woman Museum. So definitely go visit. It's open to the public. But we did portal live from VR Land to Frame, and demonstrating basically just interoperability between platforms, and just in its simplest form. I mean, this to me is one of the coolest things about developing on the web, is that everything is interconnected. And even though we ended up, you know, there were some incongruencies with the avatars from VR Land to Frame. we were still able to carry our personalities and ourselves from one platform to the other. So, I think in these conversations, we're looking at ways to kind of extend that a little bit. How do we get more of, our person, our being, our likeness from one platform to another. And I think those are the conversations we are starting to explore to figure out how to make these platforms through the web more interoperable, but in its simplest form. That's what it was. And we did it live, which was super incredible.
Yeah, super proud to be a part of that. And these are why the conversations are happening today. I'd like to pass it over to Karen to just do a little bit of an introduction and announcement about our XR Women Museum, which this is kind of the inaugural announcement, which we're really proud of. And Karen, why don't you share with everybody a little bit more about the museum and the reason why we created it?
Sure. Thanks, Julie. So as Julie said, XR Women has been around for a little over a year. We now have a community of almost 500 women from 42 different countries around the world. We've held about 60 events at this point, with women working in XR as speakers and presenters. And we decided that we needed to document this in some way. So we chose the Frame platform, which is absolutely amazing, with the wonderful Gabe Baker as the head developer there, to showcase the many events that we have had and the women who have appeared on our stage, as a way of exemplifying the diversity and talent of women working in XR. So we're very proud of what we have done. We hope you will visit it. It's framevr.io/XR Women Museum. And you can go and visit and have a look and see all these women, way more than 60. We've had 60 events, but way more than that have presented everything from pilots, nurses, 3D artists, professors, an astronaut, automotive executives. Really runs the gamut. And
a truly inspiring place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is fantastic. I am so excited, and I haven't had a chance to check out the museum yet, so I'm going to go there now. And thank you for bringing together so many fantastic collaborators. I have met some of my favorite collaborators through your group already, so thank you. Thank you for your leadership. And we're going to transition to an amazing panel. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be transitioning to an amazing panel led by Amy Peck. And Amy, I'm just going to pass you the microphone so you can introduce these amazing panelists today. Thank you for joining us.
Fantastic. Well, this is a group that I sort of regularly interact with, and we regularly have conversations like this. So this is going to be just like we're hanging out in our living room, having a glass of wine, coffee, and chatting about the metaverse. So I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves, and we can start with Rika Nakazawa.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I'm missing my glass of wine here in Barcelona, which is a little unusual, but good to meet everyone. Thank you for having me here in a Rockstar cast. I'm Rika Nakazawa. I'm Group Vice President within the New Ventures and Innovation Group, which is newly formed actually as of almost a year ago at NTT. And I'm Vice President of Connected Industry, and have been a big fan of your work, Amy, and all the great things that are going on in the XR/now Metaverse, and looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Excellent. And Maria.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. It's incredible, all these talks and how much information and how we are shaping and helping to contribute to this field. I am Maria Pace, and I am technology leader in mixed reality at Microsoft, and I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And thank you so much for having me.
And Niko.
Hello, everybody. My name is Niko Chauls. I work at Verizon, where I run a product innovation team that builds products and solutions and platform capabilities at the nexus of XR and 5G. Thrilled to be here with this total rockstar cast.
And Cynthia.
Yes, I agree. I'm not the rock star, although I play one on TV. So I work at Walmart, and my team is building the central 3D model pipeline that serves the entire enterprise. I always say to avoid digital triplets and quadruplets. They're hard to carry, as we women know. And we also use those assets in my creative team to create the marketing and merchandising scenes that you see. And I'm really happy to be here. I'm among giants, so yay.
Excellent. So let's dive right in. I love what we just saw, with Julie, Karen, and Sophia, and the Women in XR group, and kind of jumping from one world to another. But all the five of us are actually focused on, what's the business utility? And so, we talk about metaverse, and there's just a lot of hype. But really, let's talk about some of the use cases and utility that we're seeing, with our customers and with our clients. And maybe Cynthia, let's start with you.
So I think about this a lot, obviously, like everyone else. And in a big organization, what's happening is everyone is hearing about the metaverse. So there's those people that are hearing about it and doing something about it, hearing about it and wanting to be a part of it, and then hearing about it and not knowing what on earth we're talking about. So I think interoperability to me actually starts internally. And one of the things that I focus on every day is bringing those people together, because if we don't align on what it is we're doing, we're going to have that situation where, let's say, we might build something that's too far forward, and then the marketing team is like, well, we don't understand what you did. So I always say, so goes inside, so goes outside. So I focus a lot on that use case, that business case, because it will ultimately serve the business well. And I think later on, I do want to hit on brand a little bit, because it's going to be key, I think, for doing this the right way. I don't think there's a wrong, but doing this in a way that benefits large and small brands. So.
Yeah, and I'd love to go to Rika and then Niko, which I can't say 10 times really quickly in a sentence without mixing up those names. But start with Rika. Also, just from because Rika, you're focused on infrastructure and IoT, and again, are you doing that same strategy, kind of looking internally, at NTT, and then externally to serve your customers?
Yeah, what was really noticeable, I'm in Barcelona for Mobile World Congress, and it was just how much there was around the metaverse and then conversations about XR. And I actually made a comment today that, ironically, during COVID-19, with us all having something on our face all the time, I think in some ways makes it a little bit more translatable for us to have something on our face for XR, so whether that be VR or AR goggles. And in any case, so there was a lot of presence at that here. And in our work, it's less about how we internally use it and more of how it's a natural extension with our clients, because we've been in this space at NTT around the choreography of data, connectivity, and intelligence. And as Niko was saying with 5G, we too are pushing forward around 5G, private 5G specifically, and some of the use cases or applications and the value that we find of leveraging on-prem 5G, so to speak, is really about enabling those experiences that are going to hit the mark for some of the businesses, as we're all coming out of what I call a digital hangover, as we've all binged on digital over the past 2 years just to survive and thrive. And so using augmented reality, XR, to enable the workforce, especially in Industry 4.0 or manufacturing, oil and gas, resources, et cetera, has been something that has been really quite remarkable. I've been in the space, as you know, Amy, for a few years, and we were, pounding the pavement and like the table saying, this is what it's going to be like. And it's interesting to see how now, from a practical enterprise application, because of the security enhanced 5G protocols, for example, and security being so top of mind, that's become increasingly viable. whilst there continues to be a lot of great innovation and investment that's happening in the space. And so it was really beautiful to see a lot of key stakeholders across the landscape of service providers, infrastructure providers, device makers, software developers, of course, all coming together to make this happen. And it's just, we're just getting started at this point, right? We were early pioneers a few years ago, those of us who are here, but now it's extremely exciting to see how it's all going to manifest moving forward.
And Niko, if you want to kind of follow on, kind of on the network side.
Yeah, so we are, I guess we would say we are purveyors of what I like to call smart pipes. Instead of the dumb pipe, how does this network enable this new sort of 3D XR universe? I try not to say the M word because it just causes confusion, and there are no common definitions that are readily agreed upon. That's probably the biggest challenge that we're facing internally and also with our customers, is just definition of terms. And I find that we have to start every meeting with, here are the words that we're using, here's what they mean. If you disagree, that's fine, but this is how we're using them for this meeting, and then get into the meat of whatever you're talking about. But all of the use cases that we're dealing with are similar. I imagine to what everybody here is grappling with, from collaboration to communications to hard skills training to worksite safety to manufacturing, industrial AEC components. They all need a network, and they all need a network that can understand and be relevant for 3D holography, real-time telemetry. The one point I would bring up is the enterprise space is wonderful in that nobody cares how dorky you look if you're wearing a headset, or what color it is, or fashion statements around it. It's all about ROI, and if the ROI is there, then companies will proceed. And in that respect, interoperability is almost a conversation that the Fortune 500 companies we're dealing with, they demand it as table stakes. They won't even engage in the XR space unless it's there or there's a path to get there. Beyond their innovation teams, beyond their R&D groups. So it's a responsibility that we all have as purveyors of XR and 3D and spatial compute. We have to solve that in order to move forward. It's required.
Yeah, I was having dinner with a colleague last night, and we were joking that it's not an IT department, it's an NO department. And to your point, that if you can't seamlessly get up on the network and not pull too much compute and have all the security protocols in place, it's not going to happen. Right? So it is a critical component. Now, Maria, you're coming at this from a completely different perspective, right? You're an enabler in a different way. So you're working on the hardware so we can access these. And HoloLens 2 is an amazing piece of equipment. So tell us how you're looking at this from the hardware perspective.
Yes. So of course at Microsoft we have been from the early days meaning 10 years ago, let's call it, which in this industry that's like ancient, right? I mean, even 5 years ago is ancient. So looking back a few years ago when my team was working on developing HoloLens 1, and a lot of questions around this because we put together the most amazing hardware team, technical team, looking at the display and all the optics and thermals and, looking at the wearable comfort, etc. And there was a big question, should we target enterprise? Should we target consumer? We didn't know. And at the time, we decided to target both. Of course, from the consumer side, there was silence, nothing. From the enterprise, it was just amazing because people saw the value in this, and then they were able, but the hardware is just one component, right? Then you need your own applications. You need to develop a whole array of things to use the hardware. But we found that, yes, enterprise had a big value into this. So then we move on to developing HoloLens 2 from the learnings we had from HoloLens 1, and that was 100% focused on enterprise. And so, yes, we continue to see the value into this. Now, of course, the pandemic came, and now everybody's glued to their Zoom or Teams, Microsoft Teams. And now we begin to see the demand for this immersive experience, and we call it presence, right? We want to be immersed in a 3D environment. And that's when Microsoft is working on mesh for the metaverse. And internally, I do hear a lot of metaverse, but I think one point we all converge into is this sense of presence for us to collaborate in a 3D environment from anywhere around the world. And that's, I guess, the beginning of the stages. Now, of course, Microsoft also purchased recently Activision Blizzard. It was a very large amount of money, $70 billion cash transaction. And that, of course, sets a huge platform to continue building this metaverse, which, of course, we're still trying to define as we go in many different areas. But with the Xbox side and other tools within Microsoft, not only we are trying to enable enterprise to do more, but also the consumer side. So it's all shaping as we go, but definitely we need hardware. We need hardware, but the hardware has to look primarily something, lightweight, comfortable, and, preferably something that people can wear every day, all day long. And so there are challenges around that on the display side, battery, etc. But so excited to see all the progress being made around the technical paths for the hardware.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm with Niko. Especially in an enterprise construct, I like to avoid the N word at all costs because it confuses the issue, right? It's not helping the conversation go forward. To your point, everyone has a different kind of definition of what it is. It's really, what is the utility, what problem you're trying to solve, and what is the ROI? And so, I'd like to kind of pull apart that ROI piece. And I think, we can all agree we're seeing a lot of strategies where, especially with brands. And so, Cynthia, I'm kind of adding this, in your direction, where there's this sort of frantic land grab. It's like, we're going to miss out, So first of all, Metaverse didn't just drop from the sky, and the Metaverse isn't going anywhere. So, there's time. It is, in fact, infinite. It is not scarce. There's not a shortage of digital land. So, with a strategy and a value-first approach, how are you thinking about it? As Cynthia, I know you can't necessarily comment specifically on Walmart, but you are right in the middle of this, with your 3D and sort of CG background. So how are you thinking? If you were to advise, brands, what should they be thinking about, and what is a strategy-first approach?
I love the ROI thing because, of course, right? But I think the definitions of R and I need to vastly change, just as the definition of what is success. And I was thinking that I am not sure that from a user engagement standpoint that the definition of success has changed in the last 20 years. It's time spent, it's basket size, but it's time spent with that brand. And so we have talked internally, but also with my brand colleagues across the industry, that you have to be able to redefine the success. And this is going to be very uncomfortable in interoperability to say it's a success if they start with a certain landscape, literally, and then we make it easy for them to go away. Like, that's a very hard concept. And then the other hard concept, I think, with e-com especially is, you know, at PayPal, we always talk about greasing the runway to checkout, right? Less clicks, got to get them through checkout. But I think what Metaverse is going to teach us is the opposite. We want people to stay, and then we will figure out how to determine if they're going to make a purchase or how it is that we benefit from that. But with R and I, those things, I imagine that it's going to be very uncomfortable for a long time, but we have to. And like with brand guidelines as well, you know, like I said, I run the 3D pipeline, I run 3D creative team, and you know, the criticism is always like, well, I can tell that's not real, and like, I'm like, you know, come on. But now we're going to bounce the other way, and I've enjoyed that conversation too. Like, okay, if brands have human as one of their characteristics, now what are you going to do? We have to redefine those things too. And a third thing that I want to mention, which is important, is in an interoperable world, who owns the relationship with the customer when something goes wrong, mostly, and when something goes right? You know, people were reticent to use services like Instacart and DoorDash and others because if you have a relationship with DoorDash instead of the restaurant and you love the food, you're probably thinking about DoorDash more than the restaurant. But when something goes wrong, luckily for the restaurant, you blame DoorDash. So that's another thing. Like, how are we going to make sure we think that through? Because it's important when you're diffuse, but you start at a certain point, or you interact with a brand or a product or a representation of a brand. How are you going to define what the person should do if they have a need to relate to you, to communicate with you? These are all new questions, and they're not easy, and they're actually scary because they're complicated. So trying to find ways to simplify that and to start at one place and kind of walk our way through. But it's a whole new world, and I've talked to a lot of people in the brand industry, and I don't know if we're diving deep enough into the new brand guidelines. That we have to redo those. So like I said, interoperability for me is an internal construct right now. And we all have to align, not representing the company I work for, but let's say that you have a business where teenagers aren't necessarily your core customer. Well, now they are. So those customer profiles that we always talk about in meetings, those need to change. And so it's like this huge problem internally, which I know that we'll get to, but it starts with asking the right questions. And we're just trying to come up with what are the right questions that we need to answer. So
can I just interject? Yes, please do.
Cynthia, you have just described the pain that I deal with in a bunch of meetings on an ongoing basis. I want to just bring you into a lot of the meetings we're having and say, listen to Cynthia for 5 minutes, stop talking and just listen, because you've articulated. I mean, if we stopped right now, I would walk away with redefine, R&I and digital hangover, and my life would be better. This is great.
Actually, I'm not often asked to talk more, Niko. So I love you right now.
Amy, I'm gonna splinter off of something that was inspired by Cynthia. Rather than I would actually challenge what return means from a value perspective, because ROI ends up on spreadsheets. But what COVID-19 has done is that it's really humanized a lot of our work and our lives and how we engage, and XR has a big role to play in that. And so when we talk about return on investment, rather than just pure profit and cost savings, I think we have the opportunity to use XR in the metaverse to start appreciating the value that change can bring. And so that whole idea of, shareholder primacy and pure shareholder benefit to stakeholder. And of course, I'm now, not about to launch into a whole sustainability agenda, because that's a soapbox that I will not get off of, but really thinking about the impact beyond and what the value is. To Cynthia's point, I think we really can use the future of metaverse to think about that. If we had a digital twin of the globe and we had it in front of us, and we saw the fires and can feel the heat and can see the droughts and can choke on the pollution literally in the digital twin metaverse, I think it would be much more visceral, and I think a much more powerful agenda when we think about what is the return on making change.
No, but I don't think that's actually a splinter, because I think it's part of this strategy, moving into this metaverse, and that people don't want to just go to a mall in the metaverse, right? And that value is going to have a completely different definition, has to have a completely different definition, and some of the data points that will define value for brands is going to be there. It's not just ESG as a marketing, it's not just D&I as a marketing tool. It's got to be endemic to these companies, and that how they are giving back to the planet is going to impact what their value as a brand is. So I am actually glad that you brought that up. It's a little bit of a turn from interoperability, but I think in this grander landscape of things, this is an opportunity for us to redefine everything, not just R&I, not just value, but instead of replicating, I know that the Wired magazine had a great article by Kevin Kelly called Mirror World, several years ago. But Mirror World, I think, is just not the right approach. I think the beauty of this is that it's experiential, and it doesn't have to be a mirror of the physical landscape. That really this is an opportunity to think more broadly, but then sort of drawing back on how do we tackle then some of the technical implications of that. And we have very strong panels coming behind us to talk about that. But I think, Niko, I know you look at this a lot. When you're working with your retail brands specifically, how do you find that balance between, kind of advising them on what their customer experience would be versus the how do you make this happen? I think you're muted. Oh, did we lose you there, Niko?
We can see you.
We can see you. We can see you sort of smiling. All right, I'm gonna go over to. All right, we still can't hear you, Niko. But I'm gonna go to Maria, because you did bring up Microsoft. Are you back with us? Not yet, Niko. So we'll talk about Microsoft Mesh until we can get Niko back and better than ever. Yeah, we're going to spend all of our time in the metaverse, but we can't get off of mute. So Maria, Microsoft Mesh is, again, a great opportunity, a great tool for brands to be able to kind of leverage that toolkit to start to understand what those interactions look like. What are your thoughts on the how and the why for brands?
Yes, this is super exciting topic, and I think let me first bring at this point that accessibility is super important. And one of the things that I love about Mesh is that it's now being developed to be accessible from PC to mobile, and of course the ideal will be on a headset or a VR XR tool, because then you really have the ability to feel immersed around you, 360, share your content with the avatar. So the avatars is another thing that we have mentioned as well, and that Microsoft is working on the platform for the avatars. And it's really amazing when your avatar can also follow your facial expressions, because you need to feel really like you are together in this mode. You need to be able to make eye contact, and it has to be all in real time. Right. And so that's why Niko's work is super important, because any lag can really affect the experience. Right. And so, so for brands, it's a huge open market, and we hope to support, especially for all the enterprise in this space. It is, I do see collaborations being made. I'm not sure if I can talk about them in public yet, but I'm sure we will see some things coming up in a few months, which is super exciting, and it's really opening a whole new world, a whole new experience, not just the retail shopping and stuff, but I think it's more of that connection with who you are, who your environment, and it's creativity. It allows you to also create your own space, and this is something huge, because normally when we enter into a space, it's already been made for us, and we just accept whatever is there. We like it, we might not like it, but in this particular case, it just opens a whole new world to say, well, I want to change this, and bang, you go and do it. And so it's just a whole other different way of thinking, really. So I'm very excited for what's coming up next, and also with all of the tools that Microsoft is working on internally. I mentioned Activision Blizzard, and during their negotiation, it was interesting that in 15 minutes, the word metaverse was pronounced 10 times. So, yes, so we still don't know exactly what the metaverse is going to be, but definitely I think both Microsoft and Meta have this focus on the metaverse. So super excited, and I'm hoping that Microsoft can continue working with the brands and the retail to really get it right. And it is important that we bring this humanity aspect, and especially we do it early on to set up a strong foundation that then we can build on top of this. And humanity is definitely very, very important into this. So very excited.
No, and that's true. I'm glad you brought up sort of the human element. So now that Niko is back, but just before you go, Niko, I just want to, if you guys have questions, we have a lot of firepower here on this panel. So I can see StreamYard. So if you're in StreamYard, please post your question in the comments. If you're on some of the other, on YouTube or other streams, post your questions, and the fabulous production team will try and move them over here so we have some time to answer them. So Niko, back end, how, front end, what and why? Go.
No, yeah, okay. Not sure I can cover all of that, but just on the sort of the impact, the humanity, the dealing with more of the humanness of what what these tools and this new universe can provide. I still find in the enterprise space, the biggest struggle is putting up qualitative and subjective KPIs against quantitative, data-driven spreadsheets. And despite everybody acknowledging, sometimes with lip service, sometimes more so, the importance of feeling, of social connectedness, of dealing with people or avatars as people, it's still given second place next to here's a spreadsheet that shows 2% increase in this. That's always going to drive either the R or the I more effectively than making an argument for we should do this because it builds better connections with our customers, or it enables you to feel or get a better understanding, to sympathize, to empathize, to understand what your employee, your customer, your consumer is feeling, or if they understand something, or looking them in the eye. All of that is critical, and we know it, yet how do we put that on the same level as sort of hard data and hard facts on the quantitative side of things? I think that's where we still need to push, and I'm not sure how we do that effectively, apart from through experiential demos, which I think most of us recognize that people experiencing things rather than showing them or giving them a PowerPoint is the most effective way to show the power of this industry. but that doesn't scale, and that's hard to do. And it'll get easier as the devices get smaller, lighter, thinner, and the network can support the higher data flow, lower latency, and edge compute. And the people who are building experiences like some of the ones that were mentioned earlier are building for that lighter device, for that advanced network. That's where it will really come through. But I think that is philosophically one of our biggest challenges, is how do we give the emotional human components as much weight as the quantitative data.
Yeah, and that sort of feeds back into what Maria was talking about, is being able to kind of track enough of what we're doing, as humans, so that our avatars are that expressive. And I think all of that's coming. And I see Evo, commented, the power of collective experiences. I think that's really true. I think that this concern that we're just going to want to live our lives in the metaverse and not the real world. I think it's going to connect us in a way that's really meaningful if we all engage and have agency and have a voice in how this moves forward. And I'd like to go back to again some of the business case. And I've always been a believer that consumer adoption is going to be one of the biggest drivers for business adoption, because in the same case of mobile, it wasn't until they became really ubiquitous in our own lives that we then started to be able to have that real utility in our day-to-day, because now there's a learning curve, and there's the network challenges, and then there's the Department of IT/NO. And so, how do you see sort of games and entertainment and the consumer adoption, impacting how we can start to then really leverage these technologies at work and for businesses? And Rika, maybe we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on what Maria was talking about with what she found when they brought it to consumer and enterprise. And in the case of the HoloLens, that there was a take up on the enterprise and some crickets over in the consumer. So I think I might want to challenge that. And part of it is because when you look at the landscape of the workforce and in enterprise, it's a changing landscape where you have digital natives, the millennial Gen Zs that are coming in. And I was talking to somebody from ARM the other day, and he full on believes that the Ray-Ban glasses from Meta is something that is going to get a quick adoption if it hasn't. I don't know what the current statistics are, or at least something like it. And so I don't know that it's necessarily going to go from consumer to business. I feel like in the case of XR, that the business value is going to be a driver for it, where the workforce is increasingly having the opportunity to do work that is more digital. And so maybe I'll just provoke the thought that it'll go the other way with XR, where the drivers and the millennial and Gen Z, and now that we're in a world where we're 4 generations deep in the workforce, and XR frankly also enables people to stay and work longer, if you think about it. So people, the baby boomers and others that are aging aging or advancing or getting smarter, growing is maybe the better word to use. So I really think that there's an opportunity for the business value to drive more of the adoption, and less about how do we bring elements of gaming into the enterprise world to advance adoption. But I'll just provoke that for now.
Yes, I like to. Can I jump in? Oh, Amy, you are muted. I'm sorry.
I said, actually, I do want to continue that, and we'll talk about that next week at South by. But I thought we had 5 more minutes, but we are wrapping up now. I really want to thank, Evo and Ben for inviting us today, and thank all of you. You are all amazing, and I can't wait to see all of you IRL next week.
You are bringing You are bringing together such fantastic use cases, everyone. I just want to thank you for insight into how to align with your work, ways that we can work together down the road. I hope that all of you are finding some potential collaborative experience coming from these conversations. And it sounds like South by is going to continue this conversation, Amy. So for those of you who are going to be at South by, that's a great way to participate. We're going to bring off all of our panelists. So thank you, Cynthia, Rika, Maria, Niko, and Amy. Thank you so much for your participation here. And I want to welcome our next moderator, Sophia, who is a fantastic collaborator here, not only with the XR Women, but across our industry. Sophia, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we have an interesting panel coming up here with a number of leaders, not just from the standards making side, but also from the independent community of research and development, from those who are helping us see how all of these pieces fit together. So Sophia, thank you. And Neil, Trevor, and Robert, thanks for joining us today.
Hello.
Thanks, Evo. Hey guys. So we're going to be talking about the Constellation of Standards for the open web and what is currently being worked on to extend formats and standards for the new types of programmability and interoperability. And I'm joined here by Neil Trevett, Robert Long, and Trevor Flowers, who are all doing really important work to extend the capabilities of the web. So let's start with brief introductions by the panelists. Neil, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yep. Hey, everyone. Hey, Sophia. So my name's Neil Trevett. My day job's at NVIDIA, but I'm here representing Kronos, which is a standards organization. We do open interoperability standards that are relevant to the metaverse. We've discovered that we've been working on standards for the metaverse for many years. We just didn't realize it. But we do things like the Vulkan 3D API, the WebGL API for 3D in the web, OpenXR, for portable access to augmented and virtual reality hardware. We do the GLTF 3D asset format, and we have a 3D commerce group that's using GLTF in 3D commerce. So there's a lot of stuff that we do that is becoming accelerated by the interest in the metaverse.
Thank you, Neil. Robert.
Hey, my name is Robert Long. I am a software engineer at Element. We work on encrypted chat apps, and most recently on Third Room, which is a decentralized metaverse platform built on top of Matrix. And in my spare time, I am the co-chair of the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group. Yeah, I've had a long background in WebXR and things around that.
Thank you, Robert. Trevor.
Hi, I'm Trevor Flowers. Currently with Transmutable News. It's we publish a weekly newsletter about the wider web and the agreement Bedrock. I started working on web browsers last century on one called Net Positive on the BOS, if anybody remembers those things. That's ancient history. But then I also recently worked on Firefox Reality with Mozilla, which is now taken up by Wolvik, which I'm happy to see. So yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome, guys. So, okay, so Neil, we'll start with you. We're very familiar with the incredible work that Kronos Group has spearheaded for web standards over the years to include WebGL and OpenXR. What are some of the pieces of the puzzle that we need to think about setting standards for, and who's currently working on these?
So I think at the highest level, the new opportunity and challenge for the metaverse is not to get distracted by trying to look too far ahead. I've seen many interesting debates on what does the metaverse actually mean. We don't need to solve that question. There are many short-term opportunities bringing spatially based interactions to a broad range of people through a wide variety of user interfaces. There's so much that we need to do and can do and benefit from on kind of a grounds up approach. I think is going to be probably the most productive as we are on this journey towards the metaverse, whatever that ends up being. But what it means is that I think we need a lot more coordination, because if we are going to change the world and have a lot more social and professional interaction in a spatial web, there are just a lot of pieces that have to come together. And that's why we've called this session the Constellation of Standards, because Kronos can't solve all of that, of course. No one standards organization is going to solve everything. We need to have a new level of coordination between all of the standards initiatives that are out there. I think that is kind of from an organizational point of view, that is a kind of a new thing. We're going to need new levels of cooperation to build the standards that we need and thus move this whole opportunity forward in a pragmatic way.
Absolutely. And so, Robert, let's move to you. You're the co-chair of the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group, where you're helping to identify and bring in independent R&D efforts around GLTF extensions that are then brought to Kronos and other standards group for collaboration. First, give us an overview of the group. I mean, I did a little bit there, but go deeper into what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so it's a partially W3C community group, kind of using the backbone of W3C to provide a good community structure, a good working agreement for everything that we're doing, and intellectual property agreement so that we can write specifications and people can use them without having to deal with the legal parts of that. So we have a community side of the organization that's doing independent research, really just like lots of talks, events, collaborations around content, safety, privacy, all of the different pieces that we need to come together and figure out as a group. And then there's the standards side. So we have a group that's working on GLTF standards, as well as standards around WebAssembly for user-generated content scripting. Yeah, lots of pieces coming together.
Yeah, absolutely. Really important work that you're doing to kind of rally all the independent creators and everybody that's out there working on this. So give us an overview of the current state of interoperability and the standards surrounding this.
There's a lot of different pieces that are kind of in progress right now. I would say GLTF is one of the most mature and well adopted in this space. We have people using it as the content for just about, I would say a majority of the platforms out there are supporting it one way or another, whether they're using it as a runtime format or they're using it as some way to like import into a larger asset pipeline. It really has made huge progress in the short time that it's been around. Other things that are going on, I mean, you've got the WebXR standard, which is helping out a lot. OpenXR, basically all of the work that Kronos is doing is really, really helpful here. On the other side, we have things coming around from Pixar and Apple are working on USD, which is getting some traction. We have a avatar standard that's emerging on top of GLTF that's called VRM. And that's really exciting. Would love to work more with them. Yeah, lots and lots of technical standards coming around right now. There's a lot more work to be done on every single one of these stuff. So.
Yeah. So in that, and please, if anybody else wants to chime in on this, please feel free to do that. But I'd like to learn more about the standards and the efforts that you were mentioning and how you guys are collaborating with Kronos specifically. And please, Neil and Robert, please chime in on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, from the Kronos perspective, we love the work that OMI is doing. So this is a great example of the kind of cooperation that we need to build. The OMI is bringing a very high energy, positive input into GLTF from the OMI community. It's reaching out into a community space that Kronos doesn't directly interact with so much. It's great to get their input and insights into how to evolve GLTF for their needs. And I think Robert would agree. Where the big interesting challenge for GLTF specifically right now is to evolve it from being a 3D asset format, which is basically you can describe the geometry and the textures, but it's basically, it may be animated, but it's basically an inert thing, into a metaverse asset that can interact with various metaverse worlds that are going to be built, how things behave, so behaviors that are interoperable. So when you do your MetaTraversal from one world to the other, all your objects behave consistently. Things like physics, it does. When you put a GLTF object into a swimming pool, does it float or sink? Stuff like that. So there's a whole new domain of behaviors and assets, asset properties that we need to define. And that's a pretty big job, but there's a lot of energy and interest in doing that right now. I would say that's probably one of the prime areas that GLTF is working on.
I want to jump in there, actually. I think GLTF is the perfect topic to talk about the interaction between groups that are creating specifications versus groups that are actually going through a standards process within the context of a group that protects everybody from suing everybody else for patent violations, and has a sort of a more formal, slow process for actually making a standard. It seems like one of the things that we're missing right now, and I'm actually interested to hear both Neil and Robert, your take on how with GLTF specifically, the various people who are adding modifications, and they're not really standardized. They may have a document that specifies it really well, but it hasn't gone through sort of community collaboration and creation from all of the various people who are involved with using GLTF. Like, how do you see us evolving as a community to attract more people who are currently ignoring standardization and just doing specifications? Like, how can we do that outreach? Because I see the same thing in agreement technologies, blockchains and NFTs and the variety of things, like the virtual machines that are actually behind blockchains, for example. We have WebAssembly, and there's not a blockchain out there, as far as I know, who is choosing WebAssembly as a sandboxed VM to run in their blockchain. So I feel like we're missing this bridge between a lot of communities. So I've been interested in hearing both of your takes on what we can do to make that better.
Yeah, should I go first, Robert? Then you can, what the theory is, and tell me how we're doing in practice. So that's a great question, Trevor, because it speaks to how you build consensus in an ecosystem. And the GLTF, I think one of the reasons that GLTF is successfully widely adopted is that from the beginning, we've taken the approach that we have like onion rings of participation. So one of the core tenets of GLTF is that anyone can define a GLTF extension to meet their own specific customer or market needs at any time. And you don't need to talk to the Kronos working group. You don't even need to let the Kronos working group know you're doing it. You don't need permission. No, you can add to GLTF to meet your own needs. But we also encourage, as we're increasingly doing with OMI, encourage people to take extensions and bring them to the working group so we can integrate them into the standard. That I think there is benefit to having the working group do the more formal parts of the standardization process. Part of what we do at the working group is to ratify, which means the IP policy at Kronos kicks in. So everyone who has helped build the standards agree not to assert their patents against anyone who uses those standards. So that's an important step to enable the final versions of the extensions to be safely and widely used. What the working group is realizing right now is that we need to do a better job, though, in actually bringing the outer rings of the community closer to be more coordinated with what the working group is doing and more coordinated with each other. We've actually had several instances where several different groups have done basically the same extension, just slightly different, which is okay. But we can all save ourselves some work and some fragmentation if we were to coordinate better. So that's what we're trying to do, to encourage people to at least tell us, or tell the community what they're doing, so we can have that level of coordination. And so, Robert, how are we doing? I know we're not perfect yet.
Yeah, well, we gotta figure out this audio issue here first and foremost. For those who don't know, we're working on an audio extension so that you can add audio to your GLTFs, and you can play audio in response to events or however else you want to use it. You can animate something and it's playing a track in the background. Very useful thing to have audio for your environment. But Microsoft has also worked on this, and so have I in my previous job at Mozilla. So figuring out how to combine these efforts and come up with something that fits all these different use cases and doesn't fragment the overall ecosystem is really important. So I want to make sure that we continue doing that. Speaking back on, Trevor, your point about building without standardizing, I think there's a healthy balance that we need to keep there. I think we need to keep building and testing things out. There's definitely a place where we standardize too early and we standardize the wrong thing as a result. So I think GLTF is really great because there's such a low barrier to entry in order to extend the specification and create your own work. And that was really helpful when I was working on a lot of GLTF work at Mozilla. Unfortunately, that has ballooned and now it's spread across the metaverse right now. So we need to also work with these different groups to come up with ways to make sure that this content has a long life. In the same way that we expect the web to work, a decade from now, assuming the links all still work. We want GLTF content to continue working decades from now. So we need to think about the work that is out there right now and come up with ways of standardizing this so that it's a stable spec that we can work on for a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Trevor, you talked about some of the collaboration and cooperation that needs to be done and some of the friction points that need to be overcome. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, and specifically on protocols as a baseline standard for interoperability and what is needed to enable the metaverse at a protocol level, and what are some good examples of some R&D of what's happening and work that's being done on protocols specifically.
That is a great question, which it's hard to summarize in a few minutes, but the web itself is in a sort of a strange space right now, strange time in its history, because we basically have two browser engines, one of which is completely proprietary with maybe minor additions from Apple, proprietary to Apple with minor additions from other people. And then the other is Chromium, which Google controls, but there's a lot of activity from other people, especially in the immersive browser space. Like the Oculus browser is a good example. So a lot of the standards work and the sort of defining the protocols for how all of these things happen, I feel like it's shifting from within the context of standards groups into these two code bases just specifically for the web. So, an example is that Google has been very influential on the modern versions of HTTP because they had very specific needs for their kinds of services. And so they shipped it in their browser and then sort of went through a process after the fact to actually go through standardization. I think that's kind of an example of one of the things that's happening on the web right now. And so when groups like OMI or people who are thinking about virtual machines or in any of these core web technologies, I think it's kind of it's a social barrier for sure, because a lot of times the power dynamic is very uneven. But I also think that it's a technical barrier, because a lot of the people who want to contribute, it's not their full-time jobs, and it's just hard to keep up with people whose whole job is working on VMs, or entire job is writing a new flavor of HTTP at the protocol, for data transfer. So I think one of the things that we could do as a community, as a standards community, is to reach deeper into groups like OMI. Sounds like Neil and Robert have a good working relationship, and that's a great example of a success, right? And so I feel like there are a lot of groups who are very interested in the metaverse for things like digital body portability, having what feels like a doorway that you walk through from one virtual space to another. There are just so many tiny groups working on this, and the answer to that in the past has been, in the W3C anyway, it's been the community group, where you don't need a corporate sponsor, you don't need to pay dues. And I think in some groups that works okay. I think in WebXR, it was a mixed bag. We had a fair number of independents who were not employed by a hyper corporation. But at the end of the day, if it's not their full-time job, it's just hard to work together successfully. So I would love to see an even lighter weight engagement type than the community group, whether it's outreach into the conferences or the gatherings where people are showing up, or it's showing up in people's Git repos that match query results that are related, and then making relationships that way. The standards groups can do outreach that way. I think sort of dialing all of those efforts up, which are here to some extent, but dialing them up quite a bit would help widen the number of people who are actually involved in expressing the desires that they have for the new standards.
Yeah, I totally hear this, and it's been actually like a recent issue even inside OMI, because we have this relationship with W3C community group for standardization process. What's been hardest is what is essentially a real name policy, because you're signing a legal document. It means that like people who would prefer to remain anonymous are not included in the process, and that's really, really difficult from a legal perspective. But we need to work as like an industry to try and include these people in the process. So how we've kind of decided to do this so far is we have this community angle that people can join in and talk about the higher level issues, and the working groups try and take all of that feedback into account when we're designing things. Unfortunately, I think we're leaving out some incredibly technically gifted people in the process. So I don't know how we fix this, but would really like to hear more from W3C, from other groups who are doing this in order to better serve them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a tricky problem, because you say you want the widest participation, because you say there are a lot of folks out there that can contribute, but you want to end up with a spec that people can safely use. So there is the legal aspect, but I think there's also the bigger ecosystem aspect. And I know we're all into standards here, but of course, standards is not the only solution either. I mean, we need people out there, and you kind of said this earlier, Robert. You need people out there innovating, and making the mistakes and on the bleeding edge before a technology becomes well understood enough to standardize, because you need the consensus around what needs to be done before you can make a standard. So if you're still experimenting, that's too soon. Kronos has made that mistake in the past. R&D by committee is the worst possible way to do R&D. So we need to be encouraging those folks, and also. And Trevor, you kind of alluded to this, that there is a difference between open source and open standards, and both are good. And again, the standards community, I think, needs to be fully aware of the difference and the strength of open source. It's a different form of collaboration than creating open standards, and we should be. And that can be lighter weight, because you're contributing source under like a Apache 2 or something. It has a very lightweight patent clause in there, but we need to be leveraging that as well. That can be another early experimentation area that we should all be leveraging smartly between the various ways of getting work done.
I would love to transition back and talk about some of the limitations of the current protocol, HTTPS, which is our current internet protocol. What are the limitations, and what would we need from a metaverse protocol to support additional data transmission that HTTPS was not made for?
A lot of it's like this real-time communication side of things. So a lot of people have been building on top of WebRTC, which is incredibly complex and not 100% the same across implementations. So it's hard for people to deal with. There's also WebSockets and web transport, which is a new thing that's come into the web ecosystem. Otherwise, you're dealing with a lot of custom protocols that people are writing, and it's hard to keep up with those. So, are there a need for new network protocols? Probably, but how we do that without just creating yet another node in the system, the quintessential XKCD on this, I don't know, but it's definitely needed here.
Yeah, I think there's a metric ton of work that has been done in the MMO community around sort of keeping a virtual space in sync on a variety of clients, on a variety of networks that are not possible currently within the web stack. So everything from using UDP and dealing with failures, all the way through to things like Croquet is an interesting example for this. I think they have a protocol and basically a mesh of nodes that replicate out state. Well, they have a big state machine basically that is replicated across as many nodes as people want, but it takes a completely different approach and uses, in many ways, it uses a completely different sort of worldview than what HTTP and even modern HTTP can do, because the foundations for that were made 20 years ago, decades ago. So I think the protocols that we need to do huge metaverse style information passing are out there, but it doesn't seem like it's hopping over into the web community as much as it could. I've constantly given Tony Parisi a hard time that Unity is not actively working within the browser communities to provide implementations and to provide input on standardization. I know that I worked a little bit in Kronos in the OpenXR standards group, so I know the games companies can show up at standards groups, but they definitely haven't been contributing to browser code, and I think that's a real problem.
Well, speaking of Tony, let's put him in the hot seat and bring him in to comment on this. Hey, Tony. So, Tony, did you hear what Trevor had to say?
You had to say my name one more time, but that's okay.
Okay, got it.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I did. I've been listening intently to this panel. This is awesome. Neil and I have been doing this together so many years that I feel like we're in a Sartre novel or something. Hopefully there is some exit at some point toward an actual metaverse. But Trevor, I can't believe you and I have not done this ever before. And Robert, it's great to meet you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I mean, we need, I'm going to go into this a little bit. I've got to talk, I think, in a few minutes. I think we need more stuff, as if there isn't enough stuff going on. And Robert and Trevor both touched on places that need innovation. And as Neil said, that's all the standard stuff's going to have to lag behind that, just because that's the nature of it. Yeah, so I think this has been really thrilling, and it touches on a lot of issues, problems, opportunities that this forum, MetaTraversal, has kind of uncorked just by trying to have an open dialogue about this stuff. So great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you coming on, and I know you're coming in
cannot
about
hear
you're
myself.
speaking about 5 minutes. You're speaking in about 5 minutes, and we have. I know we're going to unpack a lot of that in your keynote that's coming on. But I'd love to. Oh, she has no audio. That's fun. But
I got it now. I'm good.
I'd like to love to continue to expand upon, particularly, what you were talking about, Trevor. When the theme of this conversation is collaboration, and how that's going to ultimately grow the industry, grow the capability, bring other technologies in, all of those things. And I'd love to hear from you. And we talk a lot about, independent creators and open R&D. And I'd love to hear more from the bigger tech companies out there that we'd love to have participate in these conversations and in these working groups. So it's an open-ended question. I mean, are there conversations that any of you guys have had with some of these more well-known companies that are integrating themselves more with the immersive web?
I mean, I cover both the wider web and agreement technologies, and in conversation with many of the people who ended up working in like Web3, poorly named because it's not based on web technologies, they have the perception that that the web is slow and it's hard to get involved with, and that there's no reward to them personally. And I think one of the really interesting things that the web community needs to face is that we're losing a lot of smart people to a community of developers who are moving very quickly and innovating very quickly, ignoring all of the scam and terrible things that happen on top of it. There are people working on really interesting agreement technologies who, for companies that are paying them full time and companies that are doing quite well for themselves at the moment anyway. And it seems like in conversations with them, they basically think that they're doing something that's completely different than what standards bodies do, which I think is both, it's a communication and an outreach problem more than a technical problem.
Plus one. And I think the spatial computing gang over here needs to do more outreach. That is a big issue. It's one of the things I'm going to touch upon. Do you believe, Trevor, there's some naivete over there too? I mean, there's just folks who they're not aware how we roll over here in webland, how these processes work, and they'll probably end up, if they're not educated on some of this, reinventing a lot of stuff. Because I mean, these forums and these methods of working together exist for a reason. I don't think that's going to go away.
Sure. I mean, the interesting thing about the agreement technology communities is that a lot of them are working under pseudonyms, so the real name policies are a big problem. But a lot of them are also very young and weren't around when the web was born and didn't sort of see the path that we got, that led us to the way the web works right now. And so they think of the Web3 community as for young people, and there's no entrance to them into the older standards. So I think it is naivete. There's very little understanding of IP law. There's very little understanding of how consensus is built in the current web standards groups. So they're going to they already are running into all sorts of problems. So how we bridge while not shooting ourselves in the foot for problems we already know exist is extremely tricky, but I think dialogue is the only way to get there.
Well,
Agreed.
So the bottom line is we need to make standardization not boring.
I don't know how to do that. Yeah.
But all joking aside, it's not boring. Building consensus and having something scale out at pervasive scale is actually the opposite of boring. It's actually pretty awesome. But I agree, we probably do have an image issue. in the number of times that people say, oh, standards, they're too slow. It's not slow. To build a consensus around the whole industry, show me a faster way of doing it than kind of the way the standardization organizations have figured out over the years. So
yeah, absolutely. And on that note, we're getting ready to wrap, but part of the reason that why we're having these conversations out in the open is to garner that participation and from the community, and let people know that these conversations are happening, the work is happening, and we want people to come in and participate in these conversations and showcase the work that they're doing and get some really real momentum going around some of the stuff that's being built. So on that note, before you guys leave and wrap, what are some of the ways that people can participate in some of the things that you all are working on?
Well, from the kernel's point of view, everything we do is pretty much in the open. Certainly GLTF, everything's on the GitHub. So if you want to contribute at the technical level, just come and just pitch in. You'll be very, very welcome. You don't need to be a member, and anyone is welcome as a member if they want to get that even more involved. But the GitHub's a great starting point.
Awesome. Yeah, and Eva will be posting some links to some of these forums on the AWE Live channel. But thank you guys for joining me today. Very interesting discussion. I know we'll have plenty more of these, but love that you all were able to share your insights with us. And I know we're going to leave it to Tony to kind of dig deeper into some of the stuff that was being talked about today. So we're looking forward to hearing everything that you have to say, Tony, and take it away. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Sophia, thanks for letting me crash the party.
Absolutely.
It's good to see my old friend Neil, and again, I hadn't met Trevor in that way before. It's only been on the Twitter sphere, and Robert as well. So this is great. Thanks so much to all my group. Thanks so much to Evo and Ben and Karen and yourself, of course. I'm going to spend a little time framing, talking about this thing that I wrote called the 7 Rules. And reluctantly start to offer a few possible recommendations on what's next, instead of just sort of sending rants from the pulpit and shooting them out into the ether. So let me try a screen share here, and forgive me while I'm figuring this out. Share screen. Okay. And I'm going to share this screen. All right, Sophia, we're going to have to do a soft shoe because I need to turn on screen sharing. That's not good. You want to come back and chat with the group or Evo while I'm doing that?
I'm going to do that with you, Tony. No worries. Yeah. And right. Thank you. I just want to preface that so many people have been coming together to collaborate. And I just want to thank everyone for their comments, their participation points, and all of the engagement that they're bringing together for this conversation. Tony obviously has been leading in this space since the 90s. And Tony, you'll give us a little bit of background into how this process has developed from Web 1 through Web 2 and now to looking at the 3D web and how all of this fits together. Just want to thank those of you who have been participating remotely in the comments as well at AWE Live. Thank you for sending in your comments. We will go ahead and integrate those, and we're going to do a little bit of the sense making again with Julie after Tony's conversation here. So let's see. Tony, are you able to?
I'm working through it. I'm working through it. Sorry. Yeah.
No worries.
I'm going to go without slides. I'm going to go without slides if I have to.
All right.
Indulge me for another minute. This is the life of a browser-based metaverse, right? So screen recording. Yes, it says Chrome is turned on, so I don't know why it's not letting me do that.
So strange.
It is so strange. All right. Well, I'm going to talk at you, and then what I'm going to do is post these slides later. All right. I think this is the only way to do it. And so today I want to talk about how we're moving toward an open metaverse. I think that's what this is all about here in this forum, the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group. It's right in the name. I think what we're attempting to talk about here with MetaTraversal, which is sort of the kind of thought piece, but was actually accomplished by Sophia and the gang quite recently about portaling between two worlds, is a great first start at that, and a bit of a pinhole into what we need to do, because there's a lot of work to actually be done. So the first thing I actually want to talk about is we can't really have traversal in the metaverse without infrastructure, right? Yeah, so it's great to be able to jump from one virtual world system to another, basically by just clicking on a link effectively, jumping through a portal. But what we saw with that was powered by WebXR. So WebXR is a standard. WebXR is implemented by browsers. That is infrastructure. Sometime in the near future, we would hope that some of those things don't even have to be handcrafted the way I'm sure they were to affect this demo. I mean, and without that infrastructure, effectively, we're taking a plane ride. We're taking a plane ride within the range of whatever the plane can fly, but we're landing somewhere and we don't know when we land there, is it going to be a habitable place? Is there any infrastructure on the other end of it? Is there drinking water? Is there food? Are there people there? Do they use money? I mean, these kind of things are the issues that we're uncorking here, just with these simple attempts to connect worlds up. But really, once you start that and peel back the layers of the onion, it starts to touch on all the things that all the people have been talking about today, whether they're business and use cases like in the first panel, whether they're standards and how you connect all the pieces up like we just heard in that last panel. It's kind of where we're at today, and with WebXR and what we just saw with MetaTraversal, it's like the Wright brothers' first flight. We need a lot more than that. And in fact, we need a moonshot. There is so much here, and a lot of it, unfortunately, needs to be planned. Some of it does need to be top down. It can't all be just evolved and built upon the current infrastructure. I mean, it's great that we have the internet. I'm going to come back to this a lot in my talk. It's great that we have a place for experimentation. It's great that we have mash-upable technologies. We have open source. We have all these ways to share, and we have a foundation of protocols to connect up and build effectively the prototype for the metaverse. And that's been going on for years and years and years. And I've been involved in some of those efforts personally myself. So great place. But now we really need to start planning a moonshot. Some of it involves connecting up the Constellation of Standards, as Neil likes to call it. Some of it is inventing completely new protocols. Some of it, and I'm going to dive into this one a little bit later, and I wish I did have the slides to show you, but you're just going to have to listen to the words, is about possibly breaking some infrastructure we have and making some new stuff. Obviously, we're not going to try to do that where we don't have to, but I think we're going to have to face facts in a couple of areas that we're going to need to come up with some new stuff as well. All right. Well, with that preamble, I was asked to kind of run through the 7 rules of the metaverse. It's a little ditty I wrote and published back in October of last year, after Mark Zuckerberg dropped the M word, something that obviously company Meta didn't invent, and then we all know goes back 30 years at this point to a novel called Snow Crash. Well, the world went crazy, kind of lost its mind, and decided we're all doing the metaverse. Somewhere along the way, the folks in Web3, Trevor brought this up, you know, they think they're building the metaverse too. That's cool. I mean, we're all going to be doing this together. Meanwhile, there's a lot of us over in spatial computing land who've been grinding away at this for a while and are quite familiar with a lot of the issues. I think we've been doing that all along too. So here it was, basically, you know, by the end of the summer, everyone coming along saying, this is what the metaverse is. There are metaverses. Hey, here, come to my metaverse. There was just so much nonsense kind of running around, you know, flying around the internet. And so what started is basically a set of pronouncements from the ether where I just shot out a series of tweets spread out over the period of a week, and kind of modeled on Bill Maher's, you know, new rules, if you will, quite a bit of snark in there. I was basically realizing that I was coming up with a framework for thinking about this, and especially when I saw them starting to get pirated, thrown around, translated by people, and they were just getting traction. I realized pretty quickly I better put some meat on the bones. It can't just be 7 random tweets. So I strung them together and started really deep thinking a little bit more about what was I trying to get at here, and kind of leveraging the 25 years-ish plus at this point that I've been digging into these issues and thinking about it. And so I wrote it as a document. It's getting even more sort of play now, and that's great. I'm about to tell you what I'm thinking I'm going to be working on next, but here, let's just review first what they are.
Hey, Tony.
First rule is, yes, Evo.
Hey, Tony. Let's go ahead and try that screen share one more time with you, because I think we can get a, I want you to click share and then just click the window in Chrome. And let's try it one more time, because I do want people to see what you're talking about as you're going. We can always cut this together later.
I mean, follow these.
Nothing's working for you.
It's lost permission to capture my screen.
So
and it tells me to follow the steps. And I've already got screen recording on
Nothing's working
for
you.
Rebooting. Yeah. So
all right.
You're just hearing me talking. So I think what we should do is for the people in television land later, it's maybe what you suggested. We can do and edit later. Just run in presentation mode and cut it in. Is that all right?
Perfect. And thank you, Tony.
And
we will
to everyone out there for the technical difficulties.
No problem at all. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, no worries. All right. So where was I? Rule number 1. There's only one metaverse. There was a lot of people talking about metaverses. There's a lot of folks thinking, that one particular destination, say Fortnite, is the metaverse or Roblox. That's not what we're talking about here. And to me, this is a kind of really important distinction, because I think the semantics matter here. It's not hair splitting. I think we're talking about building a global interconnected network of virtual worlds, virtual destinations, zones, experiences, whatever you want to call them. And if you refer to it in the plural, you're immediately setting up to fragment that entire universe. And that is not a good thing. We want to go to some kind of convergence and smooth interoperability and interconnectedness between them. That's not to say there aren't going to be private zones, which could be, citizen driven, like 3 or 4 is just getting together and saying nobody else is allowed in, or corporate ones that are walled off behind corporate firewalls, or more than likely international offshoots that are controlled by specific governments. But that the overall infrastructure of this is designed to be open. It is built to be open and interconnected. And that has to be a principle from day one, that this is about building the next global interconnected network. The next rule number 2, is that the metaverse is for everyone. This is a statement that's ethnographic and technological. It is not necessarily a statement of intent around social constructs, though I think that's kind of embedded in this as well. In other words, it needs to be designed for all use cases that we can think about, and that's a big ask, right? It can be described by specific use cases, like we're getting together to communicate in a virtual world, or I am looking at a model with my colleagues and making comments on it because we're designing a new kind of vehicle, or what have you. Those are specific use cases, but they are descriptive. They're not definitive. And any attempt to define based on those use cases is going to be unnecessarily reductive, and we're going to miss a lot of opportunities there. Now, of course, that's not to say this all happens at once. We're not going to design something for to be all things to all people and get that all right the first time. So we will build this to use cases, but ultimately it needs to be for everyone, for lots of use cases. The second part of everyone means literally everyone, not just gamers, not just people with a lot of money, not just people who can afford the production tools to make this stuff. Anyone needs to be able to create consumer experience, whatever verb you want to use there. Third one, and I think no one's going to argue with this in this group, and I think we probably have general alignment anyway. Nobody controls the metaverse. It's not controlled by one company. It's not owned by any one company, whether they're a big hardware giant, own a bunch of cloud infrastructure, large media property. Yeah, there'll be very popular destinations. No doubt there are going to be dominant devices and platforms that are used for a majority of uses. But the idea that any one entity or company will control this is not quite absurd, but it's probably just a non-starter for practical reasons alone. The ability for any one company to scale. to cover all these use cases, to cover and provide all the functionality, and properly then with a bit from the business side incent anyone else who would be adding to those platforms. It's just not going to happen that way. This infrastructure needs of necessity to be open in order to scale, which brings me to the next point. It has to be open and agreed upon by multiple entities, standards-based, open source. I mean, look, without that, you would not be hearing me and seeing me right now. We would not be having Zoom calls. We would not be having Streamcasts. We would not be StreamYards, rather. We would not be doing all these things together. The global communications infrastructure is built on open standards. In fact, you wouldn't see me because the lights wouldn't be working in my home office here. And so, I mean, we could go on and on with a list of how the world works in terms of standards. They're not fun. Sometimes being involved in them, most often, is like watching paint dry, but they are necessary. They're not sufficient. Neil pointed this out in a previous panel. We need to have innovation independent of lanes of standards, but they are necessary. The metaverse is hardware independent, rule number 5. I think there's a lot of folks who are having misconceptions about the metaverse means I get into a VR headset, or I'm wearing a HoloLens, or. It is none of these by themselves, and it's potentially all of these. It needs to be, like any content and experiences created for the metaverse need to be created in a way that they can be experienced across different devices and form factors. Otherwise, it won't scale up to global size. It won't be usable by lots of people who have certain kinds of devices or can only afford a certain kind of mobile phone. And quite importantly, almost as importantly, if not as important, is it needs to be accessible. There are companies now working on accessibility in the metaverse for people with impairments. So that also means we need to think about audio and other media types, other forms of interaction. The metaverse is a network. At the end of the day, what we're building is a network. There are tools, there's client tech, there's SDK, there's all kinds of standards and protocols that go with it, all in service to connecting us all up. And really, at the end of the day, this is about the metaverse being the next evolution of the internet, which is rule number 7. And here's the thing about rule number 7. It's really the whole enchilada. I could have stopped with rule number 7, but I would have had to write the other 6 rules to explain it anyway. This is all about the next evolution of the internet, but this one is going to be spatially organized with 3D as a first-class media type. We're kind of already there on that one. Integrating all the media, integrating a lot of the information services that have come before it, subsuming them. The metaverse is also the internet in the sense that it's going to be built collaboratively, as I've touched on a few times now. So those are the 7 rules. I think there's probably a high degree of alignment with this audience. So in a sense, I'm preaching to the choir. So this was mostly kind of a little bit of framing to get us going, because here's what happened. I published these 7 rules. They got pretty popular, and overall, there's a lot of head nodding and assent, occasional dissent, and debate about some fine points. But the one repeated critique I heard was, well, okay, so you've kind of said what it could be. You're saying a lot of what it's not, but you're not recommending what to build. What should we build? Got to tell you, I was kind of hoping some other folks would come along and figure that out. I even kind of called that on the beginning of the rules and in some of my other postings. I think we have a generation of plenty capable practitioners who can build infrastructure and who can create these standards together. I think, as Trevor pointed out on the previous panel, and as I'll talk about a little bit more today, the Web3 world is full of folks innovating left and right, and they're not waiting for standards bodies, they're just doing it. So I was kind of hoping that, a new generation would come along, but I feel like maybe I got 1 or 2 more acts in me in terms of kind of laying down a few possible proposals and recommendations, recipes, if you will, for what an open metaverse could be and how to get started. So slightly reluctantly, I'm going to offer a handful of suggestions and thoughts here on what we should build next and maybe how to do that. Before I start on that, why did the web work? Let's think about it. If we can remember in the way back to Web 1.0 and why it took off, I got to say, I think it came down to 3 things. These are up for debate. This is just my lens on this. First, It provided a full stack. It had a text editor, had a browser, and there was some kind of server you could start with. And all of this stuff was free. A lot of it was open source. The browser wasn't at first, but some browsers were. And that provided the stack that anybody could use to create, publish, and experience. Second key point is it had a universal language. Anyone could write it, anyone could read it. They weren't writing code, they were doing markup with HTML. And thank you, browsers, for view source, because anybody could copy and paste and then mash that stuff up. I think without that, we never would have reached critical mass of content. And finally, the third thing is it offered business value. I mean, I know that sounds ironic because in the beginning, it was like zip code websites and a lot of people just giving stuff away. The monetization took time, but multiple sustainable models were finally born out of that. And they were done in a way that at least initially there wasn't a high barrier of entry to hang a shingle and to get started with a business. Yeah, there were high flying, well-funded venture capital-backed startups, but there were also a lot of the mom and pops just putting this stuff together, and the 1,000 flowers bloomed. Anyone could get in the game. So because of that, the web happened. And then came Web 2.0. Well, that was a completely different story. For those of you not seeing my slides right now, just imagine the little girl with the teeth gif. Yeah, it kind of happened, and we're all still in shock, I think. I mean, so much amazing value, amazing stuff was unlocked. And here we are now on live video platforms and everything that couldn't have been enabled without Web 2.0. But at the end of the day, a lot of stuff happened that maybe we need to rethink. Identity, ownership being probably the two that are top of mind. And of course, large platforms who developed really unfair advantage in a lot of ways were allowed to flourish because they provided convenience or just because they could. This is all to the good. I mean, we have a global way to communicate now. And thank God we had that during the pandemic. And moving beyond that into this somewhat terrifying world we're in right now today, we have tools that communicate and affect change very quickly because of that. That said, we still got some work to do. So I am going to make a modest proposal for a handful of tech that will comprise a minimum viable metaverse. You've heard of minimum viable product. Well, let's go for an MVP. Let's go for an MVM. First thing is we need a browser. So it's great that we have WebXR, that we have already proven or demonstrated, at least with MetaTraversal, that we can jump from one world to another. But I got to tell you, I feel like, in my opinion, and this is one where I may get myself into trouble and may be contentious to my friends and long-standing colleagues here. I think the web infrastructure as it is today for doing this is running its course. We get some great stuff in GLTF, WebGL rendering, but jamming that in, sidecarring that into object models like the DOM is proving, to be insufficient. I think WebXR doing a great job of bolting that onto the interaction models we have and, the rendering and traversal models we have. But I honestly think it could do us well to at least attempt to clean room a design here. I'm not saying throw everything out, but I might be saying throw everything out when it comes to the DOM and what we call a browser today. I'm just going to put it out there. And by the way, these are not well thought of. These are still works in progress that I'm workshopping with you right now. So take this for what it's worth. These are not big pronouncements. So first up, we need to use a universal runtime, browser, engine, whatever you call it. It's not today's game engines, though they have a lot of the underlying rendering tech. They were built for a different purpose. And it's not today's browsers. It's something new. Second, easy tooling that everybody can use at the sort of scene assembly and world building level. Absolutely need that. We have great tools for making the assets, great tools for making the underlying media type. We can, take GLTF out of Blender. There's a lot there already, but something akin to the HTML and the visual version of editing that is something we need for both objects and the behaviors. Neil touched on this before, in the earlier talk, for how we construct a behavioral universe. I started some attempts at this with Glam, a project that's 10 years old now. Folks at Mozilla picked up this idea with A-Frame. The Janus team had done a lot, and Janus VR with something called Janus ML. So these ideas aren't new, but they need a fresh look. So that's two, some kind of tooling and markup to go with this so that authoring is something anybody can do without too much professional expertise. They will need to understand 3D and be able to design for it. We need a server. We need new kinds of servers. We need persistence, messaging, shared state, identity. I mean, these are huge topics. By the way, identity, I don't think, is your MetaMask wallet. And this is where I both have a bone to pick with the Web3 gang, but I got to say, we need to talk to the Web3 people more. Not only is there great development energy there, not only is decentralization the future in many ways, though we can't throw centralization out, baby with the bathwater, because some things simply for efficiency or convenience need to be centralized. And by the way, with Web3, even the decentralized stuff is largely centralized. Read the Moxie report if you haven't. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors around the so-called decentralization happening in Web3 now. Though in theory, we are moving toward that world. So we need something akin to server technology, Web3 notwithstanding. And of course, we need the protocols and standards to glue all this together. And across all four of those things, they need to be royalty-free, open source, affordable, accessible, and again, standards-based. These are kind of obvious. These are the things we've been doing as an industry together for a long time. But I think, and this is where tip of the hat to Web3 and, helping sort of fix some of the deficiencies that we've uncovered in Web2. It needs to be two more things. It needs to be creator driven. So creators need to be able to succeed, make money, whether they're individuals working in academic institutions or in a shop of one, all the way to large organizations. These stakeholders need to be in charge of their fate and how they succeed commercially. They cannot be at the whim of platforms who take too much of their money and dictate the terms of how they're able to distribute. That is way out of whack. My company, Unity, is very much into that and helping our creators succeed. Unity and Epic are leading the charge on the thought leadership around the metaverse and how the creators that we empower should keep most of what they make, and the platform should not be taking nearly as much. And finally, it needs to be citizens first. And I'm using the word citizens here as a stand-in for, users, consumers. I hate all these terms. But everyone participating in this, who's experiencing it, needs to dictate the terms of how they interact, how much data they give up, and where their identity lives. So these are table stakes to me of how we build the metaverse. And this first little MVP needs to adhere to all those. But even within that MVP, I mean, I just said a lot. I just said a mouthful, and everything we've been talking about in this forum of MetaTraversal is touching on issues that kind of cross standards bodies, many development projects right now, so much open source, forums like this, which are more discussion forums for getting the thoughts out there. There's so many different pieces to this. And we're talking about a decade-long effort here, I'm sure, like it's going to take us the rest of this decade. But we do have to get started somewhere, I would say, as kind of to wrap this up. We do need to identify, I'd say, some simple MVP, MVM like this, some core set of principles we can put a stake in the ground in, around, and then get going, and then find the ways to have these lines of communication between the different orgs, but also the lanes in which we can work and make progress. It sounds daunting, and no one of us can keep it in our heads. I know I certainly can't. So there's a lot to do here on approach, on social structures and forums to be able to affect these changes and work on these projects. Discord is great, but it's also chaos. DAOs are great. They are still being sorted out in terms of how they can be effective in more sustainable ways. They're unlocking fundraising in a major way. They're unlocking new organizational structures, but they're also unearthing every kind of human pathology played out in real time on a global stage right now. So how do we connect all these efforts up? What's the proper role of government and other regulatory entities in this world? This has to be taken into account too. And of course, by the way, just because I'm bashing a lot of what happened in Web 2, this doesn't happen without participation of industry at every level. And industry generally stands to win big. So I think a lot of this is a matter of alignment and agreement. which is the topic of today after all. So Evo, Ben, Sophia, everyone, thank you so much for giving me this pulpit for 20-ish, 30-ish minutes. I don't know if we're doing Q&A. Again, sorry about the technical difficulties, but there will be slides, and trust me, there will be a full blog posting that go along with this, so we can amend the video with that. And yeah, thanks for having me.
You're fantastic, Tony, and thank you, number
Stop
one,
it.
for making it happen, and for number two, for showing that this is collaborative effort, and so much of the work happens in the comment line, in the chat, in the Martins. You and I had a conversation about why agreements are tricky in this space early on at the beginning of MetaTraversal. And we recognize that it is difficult to do this work in the open. It happens through partnerships and agreements, through 3 or more people saying, okay, let's work together, and then bring it back to the rest of the circle to see how we can integrate and bring it together. So we're going to do a little bit of the sense making. I'm going to bring Karen in as well. And Karen, I believe you have a participation point for us. And Tony, I'm going to let you jump off this stage now, and we will absolutely make sure to include your slides. Karen, you have a participation point.
So much, Tony. That was
yes.
Thanks, everyone. See you in
Amazing. Always great, Tony. Yeah, fantastic. Yes, well, I am here to tell you about the upcoming WebXR Education Summit on July 21st. Very excited about this. You know, WebXR is perfect for education because of its accessibility. And it's also crucial for us to transform education at this time and to bring educators on board and into the metaverse. There are many educators who have a lot to learn. They need to understand what this technology is. And so we are hoping for this event not just to be about education, but also to be educational in itself. So I'm very excited about hosting this event on July 21st and look forward to putting it together over the next few months and hope to see you all there.
Great. And thank you so much. I just want to do a few things here just to kind of wrap up where we came from. I've been taking some notes.
While we're doing XR Summit, though, could we get Sophia and Daniel to step in, because Sophia is hosting brand and Daniel is hosting that, and then we'll conclude with your final
There
thoughts.
you go. Sure. Brand Summit. I actually don't know the exact date, but it will be after the Education Summit. So again, same reasons. I mean, honestly, the reason for why we we're promoting the immersive web and collaboration through the web like this is for the same reasons that Karen just stated for education, carries on to the brand and business as well. And anywhere where we can get bigger, more engagement is where, money will be spent ultimately. So we want to be able to educate, brands and enterprise out there on how they can capitalize on this opportunity. So that's what that summit will be about.
Fantastic. Daniel here from Educators in VR and Virtual World Society. And so we've heard about the Education WebXR Summit and the Brand WebXR Summit. And I'm very honored to have been asked to present on October 13th, the Production WebXR Summit. Production WebXR. I've been lucky enough to work with some amazing people in the metaverse, and we've run, I think, in the region of about 3,000 events, large, small, some 6-day events, some month-long events, on up to 20, 25 different platforms. And so I'm hoping to share a little bit of what we've learned and then meet other people who are doing great work there. This is a frontier technology and a frontier industry. And within that, production is going to be picked up massively by big companies once they get their heads around it. And jobs such as filming in VR and streaming out. There's so many developments in that space. So I'm really looking forward to that, October 13th.
That's great, Daniel. And Julie, you have been fantastic at helping us with this sense making on this. So
I'm trying, Evo. There's so much that was said, and I'll just take a couple minutes just to kind of I'm going to zoom in here to my screen, taking some notes and pulling out. First we had the conversation with Amy and Maria, Rika, Niko, and Cynthia talking about business use cases, and just pulling out like what's needed in their world that will help them define interoperability. And I think, and I'll show you another part of my screen in a second, but definitions, which keeps coming up over and over again. I think we need to define, what is the definition of a portal, like I mentioned earlier, and, the identity of an avatar. What does that encompass? We just even heard from Tony Parisi, citizens first, but identity is not the MetaMask wallet. So we really need to kind of fine tooth into what the definitions of things are that need to be there. And I thought it was interesting. I think it was Rika that said, being at WMC, that because people have been wearing masks, they're it's really easy for them to get into headsets. I thought that was a really interesting comment that she made. There's a whole bunch of other points here, but being able to define everything and understanding who owns relationships in interoperability is really important to enterprise. So you can see the struggle with businesses and enterprise and how they're trying to grasp a lot of this, how are things going to work, and what the landscape, the new landscape is, who are they selling to? And oh my gosh, their audience has changed. Now they have to change their whole marketing strategy to talk to this new audience. The second conversation we had was the Constellation of Standards with Robert, Neil, Trevor, and Sophia, and really just talk the behaviors around GLTF. I think that's fascinating. When we start to go into production, and certain assets have to have certain behaviors, and I think that's a conversation in itself. Is how do we define certain GTLF behaviors that relate back to our avatars or relate back to the places that we are in. So there's definitely some communication there. Tony's discussion about the MVM and, kind of resetting Web 2. I think that leads into a whole bunch of other conversations, but certainly, great points to talk about how we can succeed with this collaboration. Speaking of collaboration, that's one thing that, also came about is, the sense of community, the sense of collaboration, the sense of working together at every single level right now to be able to put these new standards and protocols into place. Human first was also a big component, and then coming back to being present in that space and what defines that. So, on behalf of me, thank you so much to all the speakers and everybody who participated today to contribute your thoughts. And from here on, Evo, where do we go from here? Where do you think?
Obviously, there are many conversations that are ready to be pulled apart here, and that includes conversations around language, UX, data permissions and data privacy, how identities are managed. Obviously, from the standard side, there were great mentions today of how to participate on extensions to the GLTF spec, but also in things like VRM, so that potentially our avatars can move fluidly with us. Obviously, we have a long way to go. And Tony made some great points about, it's going to take us the decade. We're not going to get there overnight. It's okay to recognize
that was actually one piece in here. It was, I think, on a couple of them, it was, don't rush to make standards. Neil even said that too, because, you can make standards so quickly. So that's another thing we have to keep in check with each other. Are we doing this at the right pace? Is it too early to make a standard? And that's why this collaboration piece is so important.
Absolutely. The collaboration is also happening through all of you in the comments line. And I want to show you something that happened here, right? So Tony, at the beginning, really just connecting with his people. And then there was a conversation about WebAssembly and is WebAssembly being used? And so there began to be a breakdown about how WebAssembly is being used. And that included different Web3 resources and ecosystems that are experimenting. So you can go back through the chat, even on YouTube, and see how we build on each other's efforts, right? And if you want to go back and explore these ideas in a future event, we would love to do that work with you. So I just want to go ahead and put up a previous playlist, because this is the fourth in a series of MetaTraversal conversations. We are moving toward a more participatory framework, and I just want to thank our friends at AWE Live for helping us open and expand this conversation to the broader community. But we want you to go back, watch these videos, and then if you have a demo to share, if you have a talk that you would like to propose, or you see a convergence happening, and that can be around language, UX, data privacies, Web3. All of these topics today are in conversation for the next MetaTraversal. So everyone, thank you for bringing your greatest thoughts to the table. I hope you'll check out the XR Women Museum as well. I heard that some people got there during this event and watched from there. So Julie and all of you, thank you for making that happen. And from all of us here, Ben, thank you so much for producing and helping us steer this ship and making sure that we can stay afloat together.
First of all, we have an empty square here for Tony, or excuse me, for Neil, who hopefully would be here. I'm going to add Sophia. So we are so grateful for everybody who tuned in today, and very, very just the talks that the speakers gave really hit the nail on the head. We covered business, we covered tech, and Tony just completely wiped us away with all of, not just his 7 rules of the metaverse, but dove deep into it. So thank you so much, Tony. That was a brilliant discussion. Great work, everybody. Great work, production team. And thank you to everyone and the conveners of MetaTraversal, everybody. Terry, you want to take it next?
Well, I'm super pleased to share that we're going to be doing something particularly special as a targeted outcome for some of the work that we're starting the journey on right now, and that's in concert with our partners at AWE. So we're going to put together hey, Neil's there, great. We're going to put together a live stage event at AWE where we do more of the showing and walking the walk while we talk the talk. It's a big priority of mine personally, and many of us are very passionate about creating a real sense of inspiration and education at the same time by illustrating how the work that we're doing here will enable a future outcome where people can more freely move around in the metaverse and navigate through not only content other people have created, but also perhaps focusing on what they want to create, because it is a transition of the internet. That means that we're all going to be creators at some point or another, even as we journey through it. So yeah, that'll be something that will happen during AWE. The date and time hasn't been exactly set, but between June 1st and June 3rd, and we hope that you're all there to come and see it.
Neil?
Thank you.
I was just so interested listening to it all, I forgot I was meant to be on stage. So hi everyone. Thank you, Ben, as always, and all the gang for organizing. These are awesome events.
Daniel?
Thank you. I feel like this is like a family reunion. Fantastic. I have a little project in mind called Family in XR, but no, amazing. I think we're venturing into a new frontier, and I couldn't imagine going on this journey with better people. Thank you for everything you do, and the people. We're hitting the right people. We're getting the right attention from the right people, and so I'm really, really encouraged that we will one day be able to freely just peruse around the metaverse at will with everything the way we want it to be, and raise a glass of virtual champagne on the day that happens. connections.
We are only as connected as these relationships, and interoperability is interpersonal. So I just want to thank you all for showing up for the continued collaboration and for doing this work in the open and inviting participation from the global audience. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be safe. Have a good day.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.